This is an illustrator in 12-Step Recovery. I go by the name 12 Drawings. I've been in recovery for about 22 years, and during that time, I've heard very reasonable people ask the question, does the 12 steps really work? I've heard statistics, pro and con, they seem to be all over the place. And some people will say they don't work at all. You might as well just randomly try things because the 12 steps don't produce any better results than just randomly trying to stop other ways. And I don't have any argument with that. It's very hard to get statistics on who has tried what. But let's just take on the whole question of, do the 12 steps work or not? Now, trying to judge the 12 steps simply by their success rate doesn't really make sense, because it's not like a textbook trying to teach algebra. If you were trying to teach algebra, you would go through the textbook. You could go to any school in the world that teaches algebra, and you could take the test, and you could say, well, this person obviously knows algebra. They passed the test. Or you'd say they don't know algebra at all. They failed the test. So I wouldn't know how long did the person stay in the class. Were they in it for one day? Were they in it for a week? Were they in it for a month? No way to know. All you'd say is, you know what? It didn't work. Look at their test result. Their score was terrible. Or conversely, you may say, this is amazing. This person scored great on algebra. This must be a genius algebra course. Well, what if they already knew how to do algebra before they even got to the course? It's really hard to judge something like this by the percentage points, the outcome. Now, there will be people who don't like piecing things together, because I often compared working the 12 steps to following a trail of breadcrumbs left by someone before. And some people are just terrible at following a path of breadcrumbs. And the problem is, in the year 2022, when I'm talking, there are so many breadcrumbs scattered around the same area that it's kind of background noise. People saying, well, I heard in the 12 steps, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And you know what? That's not anywhere in the 12-step literature that I've found, but it gets repeated and repeated and repeated. And people actually criticize it and say, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And I'd say, well, yeah, and it's not the 12-step literature. So if you're going to go back to talking about success rate and failure rate, you'd have to make sure you're actually talking about people who used the 12-step program as originally described in 1939. Now, if you decide to use a numeric score for the 12-step program, it's kind of unfair, because even the 12-step groups admit some people get sober other ways besides the 12-step programs. There's no claim of exclusivity, and that's another myth I've heard. People claiming, Alcoholics Anonymous claims it's the only way to quit alcohol. I have never heard that from anyone in Alcoholics Anonymous. But if someone comes to the meetings, doesn't stay, they get bored, they have doubts, they're skeptical, they never come back after the first meeting, the failure rate among those people is going to be 100%. And if you're going to compare it to a textbook in a classroom situation, you'd have to say it's a terrible course. Complete failure for that person. Well, the problem is, it's reasonable to ask, if you're claiming to cure cancer, what's the success rate? Out of 100 people with cancer, how many of them were cured by this treatment? That's a legitimate medical question, but I don't think the 12 steps claim to be a medical treatment. They certainly treat a physical problem, but they're primarily a spiritual solution. And I believe it's pretty clear from the literature that that's true. It's a spiritual program. What difference does that make? Well, ask anybody who's in any spiritual pursuit of a path or discipline that's spiritual in nature? Are they told the very first day they show up everything they need to know about that spiritual path? And they walk out of that first meeting completely sure that they now have all the answers they were seeking from that spiritual path. And they have a total and correct spiritual picture. I don't know. It's kind of a made-up question, but my answer would be, I seriously doubt someone's going to walk out of their first ever exposure to any spiritual program and say, yep, I got it. And to be able to say a year later, I've totally mastered it. Well, in my experience, spiritual seekers do not have one single direction like a compass. They do tend to see lots and lots of breadcrumbs from different sources. They may find Christian Science was a great source for them. They may find veganism is a great path for them. Someone else will say being an atheist is great. Some will say meditation is great. Some may say that anarchy is the best solution for them. Well, and some people just say walking away from the problem and not thinking about it really helped them out. And these are all scattered breadcrumbs from lots of different spiritual paths that don't all lead in the same direction. And for the 12-step program to be correctly judged, it has to be judged in this backdrop of many, many, many different clues, or crumbs as I'm calling them, which lead you to a destination, sure enough, but it is strewn with many other distracting clues. So as you pick through the breadcrumbs, you go to meetings, you read, you talk to other people, you figure things out based on your best reckoning of what it is that the spiritual discipline teaches, sorting and sifting, and it's a lot of work. And some people will just decide it's not worth it. They'll quit. So did the program fail? Or did they just stop working the program? I don't know. And to be fair, not all paths are right for everyone. That's why there are so many different spiritual paths in the world. So if you demand to know if the 12-step program is a legitimate path, the legitimate path, the only legitimate path, I would say no. It's not. It's not those things, but I don't see where it ever has claimed to be. So I just wanted to point this out. As you're going through the 12 steps, generally speaking, you're not doing it because you think it's fun. You're doing it because, if you're like me, you're afraid you were going to die if you didn't get better, if you didn't get sane, if you didn't get sober. And so I worked 12 steps, not because I was trying to learn an academic subject like algebra, but because I was terrified I was going to die. And all I'm saying is, if you're in a similar situation, give it a try. It may be the right spiritual path for you, and it may not be. I don't think there's any way to know that prior to experimenting with it and just trying it. Go to a meeting. Chances are, by the time the meeting is over, you will already have an instinctive sense whether or not 12-step recovery is right for you. This is 12 Drawings. You can find more at the website 12drawings.com.